Hey everybody, Josh Sheridan here with the Barely Legal Podcast.
They demand my alter ego, but I won't go.
On today's show, we have a bucket list guest. Joey Redner is very well known in the Tampa area as part of the Cigar City Brewing outfit, which he basically created and sold. He's on to new ventures, which we'll talk about today. I understand that Asheville is becoming front and center as kind of one of your projects that you're working on. And so I wanted to ask you about that. We've got a bunch of mutual friends between Boomer Nichols, Mike Maida, Mike Rideout, and obviously your name locally is somewhat of a royal. You don't grow up in Tampa without knowing the Redner name. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, man.
All right. So are you from Tampa originally?
I am. I was born here.
Okay. Where'd you go to high school?
I went to Chamberlain.
Okay.
With Boomer Nichols.
So is that where that relationship started?
Yep.
All right. Then I forget how it was that he came to know my wife. I hate to ask, but I think they might have even dated at one point, or there might have been something there, which I just try and
we'll shelf that.
Yeah, turn a blind eye to. But yeah, so is he in Arizona or New Mexico? Or
he's in Arizona.
Okay,
Glendale or Phoenix or.
But I understand he might have some designs on coming back.
He definitely. We stay in pretty good touch. He definitely wants to come back.
Yeah.
His heart is definitely here, but his kids are there.
Right.
So.
Is he doing any stand up or any of that stuff over there?
I think he is. He's really good friends with Jimmy Kimmel's sister, Jill.
Okay.
And I think when she plays out, he tends to open for her a lot.
And he's friends with Kreischer too, isn't he?
He is. Yeah. He went to high school with Kreischer.
That's right. Because Kreischer went to Jesuit.
Yep.
All right. Did you know that crew when you were?
I didn't know Kreischer, but I knew who he was just because he was a little bit ahead of me. So it just kind of I knew of his name, but I was because he went to Jesuit,
right?
And Boomer went to Jesuit, then transferred to Chamberlain. So I
Sounds
just knew of him
Boomer
through
would do.
Yeah, exactly. I think he got kicked out of Jesuit.
Yeah, well, I was putting it nicely. Now you have a couple sisters, right?
I do. Yes.
Okay, but you're the only boy.
I'm the only boy. So I have a half sister and then two stepsisters.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Now, young Joey Redner, are you into sports?
Football, basketball. Never really got into baseball. Tried real hard.
Right.
Come from a family that played a lot of baseball, but I just never clicked with me. But football is always kind of the sport I love the most.
How are the grades?
Are
you a troublemaker? Pretty good kid? Kind of middle of the road?
I was pretty good up until about fifth grade, and then
what happened in fifth grade?
I just I don't know. I've always had kind of I had that curse of where I had intelligence, but could easily get distracted and get bored by things. And I had the curse of I didn't have to try real hard.
Right.
So then when things started getting harder, I just wasn't practiced in trying hard.
Yeah. I got through 3 of my 4 years of college without buying any books. And it's always been that,
it can
smart
be
enough to get by without trying too hard.
It can be a curse because, because eventually it does get hard and you need to have the practice of trying hard.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you go to college?
I did, yeah, off and on. I didn't have a traditional path. I kind of went right to work out of high school. I just wasn't interested. And
where were you working?
I worked for my dad for a while.
At the club or was something else?
I worked at the club for a while, but I didn't really enjoy it. The hours were tough too, even though I'm a bit of a night owl. That was too much. And so then from there, I got into video production. Always kind of had a bit of a creative side, and I got into video production and making shows. I made a ton of shows on Public Access Network when that was going strong. I produced some shows for my dad, The Voice of Freedom. I probably worked. If you watched a show in the early 90s, I either did camera or did editing or did technical directing. I worked on damn near every show.
Would you self-taught or did you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I took, they do classes there, but I was almost, I guess it was like the gym rat equivalent of like a video rat. I just would work on anything. I mean, I worked on the shows like the ones where like I would get off one show where it'd be like a black guy saying kill all the white people and go right to the white guy saying kill the black people, right to the
You're an agnostic producer.
Right to the show that was showing boobies, and then I produced like a collectible card and comic show. I mean, it didn't matter. I would do it just to learn how to do it.
Right. Now, I know through us being social media friends, I know through having interviewed your father and just having grown up locally, that politics has kind of always been kind of a a satellite orbiting the Redner world. Was that something that was discussed in your household growing up? Or were you aware of politics at an early age, or is that something?
Yeah, with my dad just, being in the position that he was in, it was in the household, at least as a topic of conversation, quite a bit. And, especially First Amendment type things, freedom of expression, things like that were just things that, at a really young age, I could almost tell you the First Amendment verbatim at like 8. And I tried to, as I've gotten older, I try to not care as much about politics.
It's not healthy.
It isn't, but it's hard for me not to. It really is hard for me not to.
It's a dilemma because, like this is something that, the last 2016 election, it fucked with me big time. Like it was getting in my head. It was affecting my mood. It was taking up a lot of my bandwidth. And I was having, conversations with a therapist, and she was saying, how much do you really think this is going to impact your life versus local politics? And for the past 4 years, I keep saying to her, the joke's on you. The joke's on you. Friends are dying of COVID. So obviously it impacted my life way more than you thought it would. But, it's hard because you want to at one point say, well, I voted and that's all I can do. But then maybe that's not all you can do. And that's kind of the ebb and the flow that I go through with it.
Yeah, I think it's important. I'm one of those people that I will try to cultivate relationships with people that I know don't agree with me, because I do believe that over time, if they think you're a good person and that you're, morally consistent and have convictions without being a jerk about it, I believe you can change minds. I don't think it ever happens quickly, but I think it at least softens some stance.
It's a marathon.
I think it is. And I think when people sort of go off into their corners and their lack of communication, I think it breeds it. I don't think you have these crazy conspiracy theories without people going into a tunnel and never having, outside input.
Well, you look at like the Middle East and a lot when we were dealing with Al Qaeda and all those types of things, and a lot of these people, like their experience of the outside world is nothing other than 42 virgins or whatever the thing is. And so if you've got no introduction to other ways of thinking, other thought, how can you be blamed for kind of being that mindset? I mean, it's kind of a sickness. You can't blame someone for having cancer.
Yeah, you mentioned local politics, and I really do believe that is more important, at least as far as affecting your life, and I think if you can get good local politicians, they do have more direct input.
Well, one of my spies, one of my plants in your orbit told me to ask you about that, but maybe we'll circle back to that at the end. So how long did you do the production thing for?
I did it for a few years.
Did you just get burnt out on it, or just other opportunities presented themselves?
A little bit. Well, it's also just, at some point you have to try to earn a living. And, I wasn't really making any money doing a bunch of free shows. Right. I worked and I made it okay. I ate, but it wasn't going anywhere. I decided I would go to college, and I just kind of had a real slapdash haphazard way. Like I started going to community college, and I went up to Tallahassee, and went to FSU, and just really hated it and hated being away from Tampa. Came back here, went to UT for a while. And then, finally when I was finally wrapped up, I was like, okay, well, what now?
Right. Did having the Redner last name, did that open doors for you? Did that close doors to you? Was it
a little bit of both?
Yeah.
I think there was some that, it was a conversation you're always going to have.
Sure.
If it was Joe Smith, it wouldn't necessarily be the association, but it's weird because it's a recognizable name, but it sounds like it would be a common name, but it's really not a common name. You don't meet a lot of Redners.
Sure. What is it? Geographically speaking,
it's
or historic?
Prussian, like German.
Okay.
And so Joe Redner's not my birth father.
Okay.
He raised me. I mean, he signed my birth certificate. He took me in right from the beginning. I'm Cuban on my birth father's side.
Okay.
And I'm fifth generation Floridian on both sides. I didn't obviously find that out till later in life.
Have you done the whole DNA deal?
I have, yeah.
I found out I was 10% Jewish, which I thought was interesting. I thought I was pretty squarely in Ireland, Scotland, Norwegian, and then all of a sudden there was 10% Ashkenazi Jew.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, it's funny. I have like 0.1%. I'm like,
I called all my Jewish friends.
How does that even count?
I called all my Jewish friends, and they were like, "You got to start charging more." So that was their little.
Yeah, I'm very classically sort of Florida. I'm cracker. Just English, Irish. They came for the free land, and I'm Cuban, Spanish, or they came to roll cigars. I mean, it's literally
you're the story of Florida.
Yeah.
So at some point along the way, you get into brewing, right? I mean, as I understand the story, and correct me where I'm wrong, is you were into it just as your own personal interest, and then you started writing articles about it. Is that kind of the gestation of how that?
Yeah. So really, back when I was doing video production, I was into beer, but because when I first started drinking beer, like going back to Chamberlain.
How old are you?
I'm going to be 48 December 2nd.
Okay, so I'm 45 December 17th. We're close.
Yeah. So I got a statute of limitations has passed when I was underage drinking.
I'll represent you.
I just didn't. I could drink beer, but I didn't take a lot of pleasure in it because the beer that I could get a hold of just wasn't very good.
Bud Light,
Coors Light, Bud Light on a good day, Keystone Light more likely, or Hams,
Ice House, or
So I was like, this is not very good. I don't see what the big deal is, but I think that got me in a mindset of, well, everyone's drinking beer. I don't really like the beer. So anytime I see a new beer, I would just try a new beer.
Right.
Because it couldn't be worse. It got me to where I'd be experimental. I'd see, a Schwartz beer or something, because we get a few German imports, but there wasn't a lot to, in 1989, 1991, there just wasn't a lot in Florida that you could get your hands on. But I just always was, I didn't like it, so I would try anything. And then about 90, I think it was around 96, I went to Portland, Oregon for a wedding. And funny enough, it was Greg Baker from the refinery. It was his wedding.
Okay.
And we were going to McMiniman's brew pubs, things like that. And I'd never really had, like Hops, I think was open by then, but they were doing like kind of real played down lagers, real light beers. These guys were doing these big stouts and these freaking super hoppy beers, like, American hops that were grown near there that they're aggressively putting in these beers. And I just had never had anything like it. And at those days you could just take beer right on the plane and bottles and whatever you wanted. So I just got everything I could. I lugged it back. And then when it ran out, I'm going around, I'm trying to find like little bottle shops that, hey, do you have this? And no one had ever heard of it.
Right.
And that's what kind of started me down the path. And it wasn't until probably 4 or 5 years later that it even occurred to me that you could brew your own beer.
Well, where did the writing about it come from?
My searches, I'm educating myself. The internet helped a lot because previously, just think about it. In the early 90s, the internet was in its it was in its infancy.
Yeah.
You had a nascent sort of research tool, but a lot of stuff hadn't been, uploaded.
Sure.
So you still have to read books.
Yeah.
And you have to go from the book to find the individual stores, and you have to use an actual phone book, or you have to just know they're there and drive around. World of Beer I used to make trips out there.
Right.
Because they had beers that you couldn't get anywhere else. But then when the internet hit, you could do a lot more research a lot faster and actually go get your hands physically on the beer because all that stuff was, online.
Well, it created a whole new market too.
Right. So I just had self-educated myself about beer styles and things like that. And it also, I used to own a place on Davis Island called Yeoman's Road Pub.
Sure.
And
I didn't know you owned that, but I know that a lot of the musicians that come in here all got their start with the open mic over there.
So I owned that like in the mid 2000s, 2, 3, or 4 around there. And I really started, because now I've got all the freaking order sheets. I can order all these obscure beers directly. And I really turned it into a very craft sort of focused bar. And that education sort of, I just self-taught, learned a lot about beer, but someone had written an article or something and had referenced, it was about beer, but had referenced Yeoman's as my dad owning it. And I just typed in and I said, actually, I own it. And also you're wrong about this on the beer and that on the beer and this on the beer. And if you ever want someone to write a column about beer and do it right, I'm happy to do that for you. I was an English and writing major.
Right.
I was being a little cocky. And she wrote me back and was like, okay. And that's how it started.
Took off. Yeah. So get me from there to Cigar City.
I always thought that, someone, we had Ybor Gold Brewing, Ybor in Ybor, and he was, again, he was kind of doing almost like hop style beers, Humberto Perez. Mm-hmm. And he was just a little bit ahead of his time. I think if they would have hung on, it finally would have clicked for them and they would have had a lot more success because he was well funded. He had a great location. The beer was solid. It was a little more, it was a little bit more middle of the road as far as the styles they were doing. But they were throwing out brown ales and porters, which for the mid 90s was pretty adventurous.
Kinky. Yeah.
And so there just wasn't a lot out there. And I just assumed someone would open a brewery and be a packaging brewery in Tampa. You look at a city the size of Tampa at the time that I started in 2007, but you got to understand my mind is, I'm thinking this in 2002, 2003, 2004, but I'm just thinking someone's going to do this eventually, and I'm going to be ready. I'll be ready to work for this guy because I understand the market. I know a lot of the key people. Like, I'm going to be a good employee for this guy. And this guy would just refuse to do it. So in asking the questions of why it wasn't being done, I sort of built a business plan. I'm like, well, we can get the equipment, all the cogs are available. We can get them here in Florida. Packaging equipment is expensive, but you can start out draft only and you can make a run of it. And if you can get a tasting room, and we have the laws that would allow us to do it. There's this exception for tourism. And I'm like, you can't argue that a tourist coming to your place to see where you're making beer isn't tourism. It is. The state disagreed with me, but eventually but
you guys had a nice quiver of attorneys available who were, I'm friends with LaRoe. I don't know if he was ever involved.
He wasn't. No, we eventually were just able to convince them at the.
But I love that about you and your family is you don't take no for an answer. You don't lay down for the man.
Well, I'll take no if it says legally I can't do that. But they tried to tell us, well, that's for Budweiser. I'm like, you can't write a law for a company. It just doesn't work that way. If I fit the same thing they fit, you have to give it to me.
Yeah.
And I probably did get that from my dad. Yeah. That mentality of you've got to treat everyone fairly on the wall.
Whatever the place was over here where the cops would run the girls in, they would have another set of girls come up on stage, bond them out, and they were just had this
running the loop.
Yeah.
And that was the night gallery.
Well, so again, and I'm very specifically interviewing you today. Yeah. I'm not going to ask you about your dad, but I was so impressed by just this organic understanding of social behavior. And I think that has been passed to you, and it's invaluable. It's just something that I don't want to say you can't be taught, because arguably he was taught it, you were taught it, but it's rare. And, I love, there's just very basic stuff that he said that sounds so nice. It's like, you don't want a guy managing a strip club. It's just a recipe for disaster. And of course that makes sense, but so many people don't get that.
Yeah. And he's consistently had female managers.
Well, and he said, how you get a guy off the stage is you ask the girls to step down and the crowd will do it for you.
Yep.
And again, so simple, but it's just these simple solutions and these very easily understood kind of ways of dealing with things that so many people skip over, looking for these, esoteric ways to address issues, with the simple answer being, the most immediate, kind of that Occam's razor type of situation. So in any event, and again with you, looking for who's going to be the guy that's going to hire me. At some point, you're like, well, I'm the fucking guy. Like that's the easy answer.
That is definitely how I got there. I was like, look, you can do this, and I felt like I had done a math problem, and I was the only one getting that answer, which is scary.
Yeah,
because you're like,
you're looking
around.
Am I wrong?
You're looking around, and everyone else got a different answer than you, and I'm like, but no, I believe that it will be profitable. This is what it costs to make it. This is how you get it to market. This is what you can sell it for. This could be profitable.
Before we go down the Cigar City Road, I want to ask you this, and I asked this of Greg Spadaccini, who does Spatty's Coffee, and this is interesting to me because you look at the wine model, you look at Napa Valley, you look at Sonoma, and then obviously over in Italy and France and all these places, you have a very specific climate that is required to be able to do what you do. And then with coffee, it's a little bit less specific. South America is kind of where it's at. And talk to you maybe a little bit about the Made Coffee venture. But with beer, tell me, because I'm really naive in this regard, is there barley growing areas? Is there a very specific type of climate? Are there like what's that world kind of before it gets into your glass? What is it that you're looking at?
Yeah, so with the barley, so in wine you have terroir, so it really matters where it grows. It's going to have specific notes, flavors based on the growth and based on the weather. You don't with barley. Because it's malted, you're going to sort of denature whatever sort of happened there anyway. You can sort of more lock it in. It's where you get terroir in beer is more in the hops.
Okay.
Hops that are grown in the Pac Northwest will have different expressions than hops.
What are hops? Is it
hops are so it's a vining plant that's related. It's a botanical cousin of marijuana.
Okay. Really?
Yes. Yeah.
I did not know
Yeah,
that.
it's a botanical cousin of marijuana. It doesn't have THC, but it grows like a weed, like weed does. And it's a climbing vine, and it needs a lot of sun, but it needs an environment that's not, like in Florida we have lots of sun, but it's the humidity is just not right. That's why it tends to grow in the Pac Northwest, so Washington, Oregon, big hop growers, and then you get a lot in New Zealand, Australia.
What about like Germany and the Bavaria? Oktoberfest. I have to imagine they got some kind of
a lot of hops. They have more of they don't have quite the each region sort of has its own expressions. The Pac Northwest hops tend to be a lot more alpha acids, a lot more IBUs, or you can grow sort of some of the traditionals. And England grows a lot of hops too, but they tend to be hops that are less of what you would use in like an American IPA,
right,
and more of what you would use in like a Pilsner or a subtle lager or a nice English ESB. They don't have a lot of bitterness. They're more flavoring. You can grow. There's exceptions to every rule. What I'm saying, but in general, each hop region does produce different types of hops.
So what you've done, the products that you put out, has that been primarily from the Pacific Northwest? Because of us being in the U.S., yes, but there are just some beers that you've got to have hops from other regions. So if I'm making a lager, if I'm trying to make something that's more of an American type lager, I might use American hops. But if I want a traditional German or Czech Pils, I'm going to use hops that were grown in that region. Now, another thing that I learned about in my interview with Mr. Spadaccini was the notion of ethical farming of the beans that you're using in your coffee. Is there a similar sort of consideration in the beer world, or is it just kind of a different animal?
I think less so, just because most of the traditional hop growing regions are first world countries.
So they have a lot of legislation in effect that's not screwing the worker out of.
If you think about, the traditional hop growing regions, even before it came to America, it was Germany.
Yeah.
It was England.
Right.
And so they just.
It's not like South America where you have.
Well, we have first world people coming in and taking over and just hiring the locals for what they.
A pittance. Yeah. Okay.
So there's less of that. But you mentioned coffee, and it just not, it matters where the bean is grown, but no one is ever going to drink a cup of coffee and be like, oh, well, the bean was grown there, but it was roasted locally. That sucks.
Yeah.
With wine, if I said, well, I'm going to get grapes from California and make them here, you've lessened that experience already.
Right.
By the fact that you moved the grapes from there and they weren't actually made into wine back in California.
Right.
You don't have that with coffee. You don't have that with beer to a large degree, because, virtually nothing that is going into a beer made in Florida came from Florida.
Right.
You really can't grow the barley here.
It's not so tied to the geography.
It's not. I mean, you still want for the expression to be true to style. You want it to come from the right geographic regions, but it's perfectly acceptable to take those from other areas, put them here, and assemble them here. You would never do that with a wine. You're not going to bring. Right. I'm not going to bring Bordeaux grapes and make a Bordeaux here in Florida. It's not just no one wants that.
In Gulfport, yeah.
Right.
So, Cigar City Brewing what was the genesis there? I mean, did you say, I want a partner, I want to do it on my own, I want to work with dad, I don't want to work with, how did that whole thing come out?
Yeah, so, I always thought of doing it on my own, and it just because not even that I wouldn't take a partner in, I just didn't think anyone would want to, because again, I'm doing the math and thinking, well, I'm sure it'll work, but I'm not sure that I can convince anyone else.
Right.
And I ran into a lot of that, people would be like, well, what happened to hops? So they go out of business. I'm like, well, that's more of a restaurant model. And, it's not like they were a flash in the pan. They're still around. They're around 30 years.
Right.
It's, and then, I had to explain the difference between a brew pub model and a packaging distribution model, with a tasting room. And, so I just kind of thought I'd do it myself. And I started, I was going about doing it. And my dad basically said, look, I'll loan you the money. And
that's what I loved about him is he
knew I was doing it anyway.
Well, but him being your dad doesn't mean a signed check.
Oh, no, God, no.
I mean, it might be easier to get a loan from a bank.
So he ended up loaning me the largest portion of the startup money, and it allowed me to basically just expand my plans. Instead of doing like a 1 barrel, I could go do a 15 barrel with nice. I could start up pretty nice. By today's standard, I still started up like a popper. I mean, it's nothing to spend $3, $4, $5, $6, $7 million on a startup now. I was all in for under 850 with cash still in the bank.
Right. But it seemed from an outsider's perspective to have.
Well, we ran lean. We ran lean. My wife had a good job at the time doing telecom, so I didn't have to pay myself anything for a full year.
Right.
I just paid my brewer, and then I was free labor, and that allowed me to just channel. It doesn't sound like much, but not paying someone $35,000 a year when you have a lean budget, that all goes back into the business.
You're then able to pay somebody else.
I can buy 2 more tanks, or I can buy another. I can hire someone else. Right. It really did help us. To sort of accelerate the growth. And then at that, as I realized it was going to be successful, I went to my dad and said, look, I can pay you back,
scale this
or I can
up
give you equity.
Yeah.
What do you want to do? And he smartly chose the equity.
Right. How long in did it become profitable?
Fairly quickly. Profitable in a brewery is relative though, because you're always chasing growth.
Well, sure.
And so, I have the money to buy tanks or to buy extra equipment, but I wasn't putting any money in my pocket for over a year. And that when I say putting money in my pocket, I mean just paying myself a salary.
Right.
I didn't put myself on payroll for over a year. And I probably didn't take a dividend until 2011, maybe.
Right.
So that's 4 or 5 years.
Now, did the idea to sell it, was that something that you were thinking about, or is it someone brought to you?
So I never put a shingle out and said we're for sale. It's just, we were having massive growth in a state where there wasn't really a craft beer presence, and there's a lot of people. So that attracted people, and people just started coming in. I'll always take the conversation. I'd love for you to tell me what you think my business is worth.
Yeah.
But I just took them out of courtesy and to gather information. I wasn't planning on selling. What really got me in the mindset of selling is that this little brewery that I set out to create, that was really I expected it to be a niche brewery. It was becoming a production like grocery store 6-pack.
I would see highlight
brewery
everywhere. I mean, was it distributed over in Europe? Because I feel like I was over there one time and I saw it.
Well, at times it was. I mean, the way early distribution plan was, where's cool to go? That's where we'll send beer.
Yeah.
That really was the early distribution plan.
You can expense a trip over there and meet with the reps. Yeah.
Exactly. But as it grew, I found that I don't like running big, super complicated things. I like to be able to be hands-on. If kegs need to be washed, I like the idea that I can go chip in that way. Whereas I just found myself constantly having to manage much more of the big picture stuff. Well, and I can do it, but I didn't want to. To me, it's like, I can do it, but I don't want to do it. And so how long are you going to do it?
Well, so it's funny because this is a conversation I have about judges and presidents. Is I don't want a judge to want to be a judge. I don't want a president to want to be a president. Most of the people that are qualified and have the correct kind of psychological balance that doesn't make them a complete narcissist, they know at the outset, this is not a job that I want. Yeah. So very much in a similar way to what you're discussing.
Yeah, I found out quickly that I didn't want to. And just, the kind of person I would have to be, when you're a distributing brewery, you're distributing to a distributor who he's doing CapEx, he's reinvesting in his business every year. He doesn't want to hear that you're not.
Right.
Because if you go to him and say, well, hey, no growth this year, he's going to go to you and say, hey, no problem. And he's going to go talk to another brewery and you're going to be deprioritized.
Right.
You have to keep up with their expectations of growth. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not poo-pooing that. I'm just saying then I've got to go out and borrow a ton of money, put that money into the business. And where I thought I was being successful, I just got into more debt.
Right.
And I'm a debt-averse person.
Right.
So
that's what I'd heard. And I'm not going to talk dollar amounts, but what you sold that for versus probably what you could have had you sat on it for a little bit longer, maybe talked to more people. I mean, your dad talked a little bit about this when he was on. The numbers are just chilling.
Yeah, I think I sold at the right time. I think the appetite for these transactions, because they were starting to get a little heady. I did something that most of the people that have sold didn't do. I still own equity.
Yeah.
I've got more cash value in Cigar City now than I ever did.
Right.
Because it's just what I rolled over with equity.
Right.
And it's just now that I have a little diversity in the play, because I don't just own Cigar City. I have Oscar Blues, I have Para, and I have.
Well, what was the Brew Bus deal?
The Brew Bus was something that that my dad, my old president of Cigar City Brewing, who had worked for my dad, Tony Derby, she worked for him for years, way prior to any brewery thing. So I've known her literally since I was probably 12 years old.
Yeah.
It's, long time, beyond even just employee. I mean, she's almost part of the family that it's been so long. They decided that hey, we've got these breweries open up. It would be a really cool idea to have a bus that kind of goes around,
like a food truck for beer, yeah,
right. And I was hey, it's a good idea. I like it, but I just didn't want to be involved with it. I felt like I had enough on my plate, and it would have just been a distraction taking me away. But I was like, sure, you want to start it out of here, and then I brewed some beer for them so that they would have their own brand that they could serve on the buses, and it just grew out of that. So my sister's involved, my dad, Tony, and then her son Anthony.
Around, right?
Yeah, they just built a huge. So they ended up buying Florida Avenue Brewery. I was looking at Florida Avenue Brewery just as an additional facility just for barrel aging because we were having trouble keeping up with that at the main brewery because we're trying to make High Life.
Yeah.
And I really like doing these. I kind of always had this thing where I was like, we're carving out 10% of soft unassigned beer because I want to be able on a whim if we want to go make some beer that strikes my fancy. I don't want to be told, oh, I can fit it in 6 months.
Yeah.
I want to be able to, to make
Is that the kind of backlog you're looking at?
It was getting pretty bad.
Oh, wow.
So doing things like, moat water.
Yeah.
I wanted to be able to have a space to do that it was just about that.
An off label or a premium label or whatever you want to call it.
We were looking at Florida Avenue, and then, my guys just ended up thinking it wouldn't be right for the facility. We would have had to do too much facility improvements to make it worth it. So we ended up not doing it. But they were getting to the point at Brewbus where they needed a facility because, it created a little bit of friction just because, Tony works for me, but she's also with Brewbus. And then we'd go and, I'd contract brew a beer for them, but we just got off a call with our distributor going, I need more High Life.
Right.
And I'm putting in a tank of some, a beer that isn't High Life. That's a tough conversation to have. So this worked out great for everyone.
It's funny because I think what you're describing as far as the path that you're making for yourself is the dream of a lot of people. But the way you're describing it, it doesn't sound any less stressful than anything that any of my divorced attorney friends complain about.
Success is a double-edged sword. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's freaking totally beats the alternative.
Yeah.
But, it does create a separate set of problems.
You're not sitting around just, counting the days.
It's like playing a video game. You don't know. You want to get to the next level, but then you get to the next level and you got a whole bunch of new things that you got to deal with.
So after you sold Cigar City, what was your primary focus?
So, I was still pretty active, fairly active in Cigar City, at least at a big picture way, but just more board meeting type stuff, which again is not, it's not my druthers. I don't want to be sitting there, but those things had to be done. And I tried to be available to do the things that were the most important, marketing type things, meeting with distributors, because as we're expanding into other states, they want to meet the founder. They want to know that you're still active and involved. And I was.
And that you're behind the product.
But it allowed me to sort of segue away from the more day-to-day direct ops stuff, which is just not something I love doing. Because again, like I was kind of getting into, you borrow this money, you've got to get a little ruthless. And I like to, if some guy wrecked the forklift into the cooler and it had to be $30,000, then I don't have to fire him on the spot.
Yeah.
But if you start doing that consistently and you can't make your payments to the bank, they take your company. You can't be as chill as you could when it's all you paying your own cash that you generated in profit.
Right.
So I was happy to be able to segue from sort of being in that position of,
having to make that decision or being the guy that answers
and
that
then,
question.
I had still had other things going on. I mean, Cigar City Cider and Mead was not part of the deal. So I'm still active in that. And then I just had other small investments that I could mentor and give advice, but not have to roll my sleeves up and be operational.
How did you meet Rideout?
I met Mike. So I'm a made coffee drinker. I guarantee I drink more made coffee than anyone else.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm 2 to 3 a day of the cans, and I just loved the product. I loved how it looked. I loved how it felt. And one of my partners in another business used to work with Mike, and I just had mentioned how much I love made coffee, that's a company I would invest in.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, oh, I know the founder, Mike. And so he set us up, and they happened to be raising capital right around then. So that's how it segued.
Didn't you guys train together too, or no?
No.
Oh, I thought you did the MMA with
No,
him.
no.
Okay.
No.
All right. So that's how I met him. I met him through jiu-jitsu. And He's an interesting cat because until you get to know him well, he doesn't say much. And he's kind of got this way about him, he's dead-eyed and just kind of look around. And he used to scare the shit out of me at jiu-jitsu.
I could see that.
Yeah, but then if you can kind of break through that, the icy exterior, he's kind of a sweetheart. But
yeah, so we found out we had the same birthday, so they're just that kismet there too. Is
right,
like, that's cool.
So where's the whole make coffee deal?
So right now, me and Mike,
to the extent you can talk about it.
Me and Mike are working on because he just I think he maybe sort of a little bit like me, like he did it, but he didn't see it as his identity, starting Made Coffee, and he wants to look into doing other things. So he really loves craft beer. So we're right now exploring opportunities where he can work in the craft beer space on that side, and he's still sort of coaching me because I want to learn more about the coffee business and be more active at Made. So we're sort of kind of working on how we can switch each other's roles, how I can be more in coffee and he could be more in craft beer.
Well, it's interesting because the setup of those two, I don't know if I'm using the word verticals right. I always feel very important when I talk about verticals.
That works.
Very similar. I mean, you can at some point they kind of take their own direction, but so this
I've always said it takes a lot of coffee to make beer.
Well, yeah. But the thing that I love about coffee, and this is what I was talking about with Spadaccini, is at some point recently, I learned the concept of obstacles to entry as a business concern. The broader, the more breadth of people you can reach with your product, the more profitable it can be. And although there's not a lot of 7-year-olds drinking coffee, you don't have that legal age issue that you have with beer and wine with coffee. And you don't have recovering, alcoholic issue with coffee that you have with beer and wine. So there is that space that you can kind of exceed what your exposure is with those other areas. But this just real quick, I'm going to go off on a tangent. I was talking to your dad towards the end of the interview, and he's telling me about the enterprise that he was doing with the hemp factory or whatever, and how, would and should marijuana become legal, the ability to switch over to that is right there. You almost have to change nothing. So that kind of reminds me conceptually a little bit of the beer and coffee type of thinking, which I love. Now, Asheville. I went to Asheville. I've been to Asheville. My family used to own a house up in Balsam Mountain, so I had an upbringing there. But recently, as an adult, went to Asheville, and I didn't understand what that place was to beer. I don't know why it's that way. I don't know how that was chosen to be that way, but it's insane. It's literally Napa Valley or Sonoma of beer.
Yeah. I think a lot of what led to it is just the legal climate is very favorable to open a brewery there. The taxes are high, but if you own a brewery, you can self-distribute. You can own multiple locations. It just, talking about barrier to entry, if you can cobble together the money to get your system in there and make beer, well, you can put it on your truck and take it to the accounts you choose to, and you capture another 30% margin, and 30% kicker on your sales probably helps. Right. We don't have that in Florida.
Now, if again, because I don't know what's off limits and not off limits, you'll give me the shut up sign if I need to. Have you been looking up there for something to do? I mean, is that something that interests you?
Well, so I had a buddy up there who has a brewery outside of Asheville in Bryson City, and we've discussed kind of partnering up, and we got pretty far down the road. I don't know where that sits right now. The climate has changed a lot too, obviously, just with with COVID and them being shut down. I own a building up there where there's a brewery, so it's possible that one day I go up there and make beer. But right now I'm not. And then with Canarchy, which is what Cigar City is in now, the collective, the overall is we have a brewery in Brevard. Wayne Womble is my head brewer at Cigar City. He now lives in North Carolina, and he's overseeing all the quality control because we brew a lot of High Life in Brevard, just outside of Asheville.
So the other thing that I love, I bought this building in 2017, and I'm kind of Forrest Gump my way into everything. Like I never really by design luck out. It just kind of happens. But I love what's happening in the Heights with a lot of these breweries, and you're seeing them in St. Pete. And I mean, it's really the culture's taking off from an entrepreneurial perspective, which I think is great. But I mean, you've got to be seen as the father, grandfather, I don't know how many generations we'd consider ourselves in at this point, but you're somewhat the prototype of that, would you say? Or
I don't know. I mean,
I don't want to. You're a humble guy. I guess.
I think with Cigar City, I just looked at breweries that were already doing this in other states and said, well, I mean, they work there, they should work here, right? Yeah. So it's funny though because my dad had a house right here on Florida. Morgan and Columbus.
Yeah.
I have ridden my bike as a 12-year-old kid up and down this street so many times. It used to be the Blue Ribbon grocery store, and across the street was the Gold Ring. Like I lived in this neighborhood as a kid.
Yeah. Well, talking to Greg when he was in here, he was talking about kind of the first wave of the Heights and, kind of what happened with his restaurant and he kind of had a bleaker outlook on where the Heights was going. I hope he's wrong. He might not be, but because I think there's a lot of great things here. I love being a part of it. With the brewery scene, you got the graffiti going up everywhere. A lot of these restaurants. I hope it can survive COVID and kind of survive some of the other stuff that's happened, but I don't really know how that's going to go.
I don't think he's totally wrong. I just think you just got to hope that he's wrong enough that it's still cool after.
Right.
But he's probably not wrong enough.
So what are you spending most of your time on these days?
I'm at Cider a lot, Made a lot. I was at Made yesterday, and then had to run some coffee over to Cider because we're trying a filtration test just to try to dial some things in. I really do like variety.
Yeah.
I like it in beer, but I like it in work too. So I love the ability to pop around to different things and those emergency calls where there's a problem, those annoy a lot of people. If I get 10 in a day, that's annoying, but I like them. I had a call today for another business with some challenges. I like those things. I like troubleshooting.
Fixing a problem is a nice feeling.
I like tinkering and I like working with a group of people that are like-minded towards a goal.
Right.
Those are the best scenarios when you have people that are, they're all willing to roll their sleeves up and get problems solved. I've got a few things going. I invested in the guys just opened Magnanimous Brewing. I've been longtime friends.
Yeah,
with
drive by. That looks. I want to stop by there. It looks great.
Yep. So I like to, I like to stay in touch with them. I've built a contract brewery in Largo. It used to be a brewery, went into bankruptcy, unfortunately, and I needed a place for cider production. It kind of just evolved out of that. That hey, if I'm going to be keeping the tanks here and there's a brew house, we might as well brew beer. So Tim Ogden, who I know he works there. He's the head brewer there.
That's the same one. Okay.
Yep. Yeah. And that's Commerce Brewing, which, our whole goal. So I learned, when I was contracting we couldn't keep up with Highlight production. We were contracting in a place called Brew Hub in Lakeland. I just learned that if you're going to cater to craft brewers, you cannot go huge. You have to do batch sizes and sizes that they're currently producing, or maybe a little more. You can't, if they have a 15 barrel system, you can't go 100 barrel system.
Right.
Maybe you go 30.
Right.
And so, that's a 30 barrel system there. We could cater to that client, and dial things into a way that's affordable for them. If you're making 2,500 barrels a year and someone says, "Oh, I need you to commit to 2,500 barrels a year," well, I'm not sure I can double my production.
Right.
I just want to incrementally add to it.
Right.
So, that's what the goal was, is what I'd learned in contract brewing, that how I wasn't being catered to as a client. And I was big enough actually to, take on a big commitment. I knew I had the short change orders in hand. I knew I could, but even then I couldn't. I had to move things around because if I wanted to do something small, they didn't have space for me.
Well, the other thing that, just hearing you talk that I love, and this is the same feeling, is what an education you have that was not a traditional one. It's, that was the same feeling I got talking to Senior is, your commodity apart and above of just your knowledge of that specific business is the understanding of the structure that
it's an expensive way to get an education.
Well, it is, but it's also it's probably a very unique one that not a lot of people have. I've been doing law for 20 years, and I've everything that I know it because I fucked up royally and had to fix it. And so, hard learned lessons are they don't go away.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So that's. But over the life of what you've done, I mean, that puts you in that unique space. Now, do you have kids?
I do have 4.
Oh, you have 4 kids.
I have 4 girls.
Oh.
Yeah. Everyone says that.
Oh.
No one goes lucky you.
How old are they?
13, 10, 7.
I've got an almost 7-year-old who thinks she's a 13-year-old, and oh my God, she it's like having another wife. I mean, like I have the same fights with my daughter that I have with my wife. They both rat me out to the other one. I mean, can't get away with anything. So and that's a bunch of weddings you're going to have to pay for too. I always tell my wife, I was like, I'm going to die of a heart attack.
I'm going to live in the now.
Yeah. So anyway, well, I know you're a busy man, so I don't want to keep you here too long. Are you into talking politics briefly or for not to?
No, I got time. This is my only other thing today.
Okay. So I have, through our being friends on Facebook, I think we line up pretty squarely on kind of how we see things. So, I didn't get to see the presser yesterday, but I heard about it. Do you think that is just posturing for the people and they kind of know where this is going?
Are you talking about the presser with Giuliani?
Yeah. Leaking fluid, leaking oil. Yeah.
Yeah, I do think it is posturing. I think, you go to the courts. I mean, they're all getting kicked out.
Yeah.
The judges are looking at this evidence and, if it's a vast conspiracy, like it would be unprecedented in the fact that you could get that many judges, who got there by so many different means to all be on board with this. You're not going to hit one judge that goes, "Oh yeah, this is true." I kind of go back to is it so difficult to think that enough people didn't like Trump that they would vote against him?
Yeah.
I mean, if they're not voting for Biden, is it so difficult to believe? Because the same people are saying that there's fraud are also the same people saying, you guys hate Trump so much, right?
Yeah.
Enough to not vote for him.
Right.
And to actively vote against him. I mean, that seems obvious to me.
But my question is, to what end is this? Is it down ballot people? Is it to
I think it's his brand. I think it's him wanting to push it, and he's got enough people to carry the water. He's just not a good loser. And I think...
But I'm surprised McConnell, and I'm surprised Graham, and I'm surprised some of these people who, although I wouldn't piss on McConnell,
because if he's a kingmaker, why not back him?
Sure.
Because he could, he can run again. That's my joke.
Do you think he will?
I don't know, but that's my favorite joke to give to liberal people if they get too happy. Be like, he can run again, right?
Yeah.
But
by no means. And this was the other question I want to ask you: are we out of the woods? I mean, we've got someone less horrible. And I'm not a big false equivalence person. I think Biden is substantially better than he is.
Yes.
So I'm not saying that. But, Black Lives Matter issues don't go away. What we do with the police don't go away. What we're doing with marijuana doesn't go away. What we're doing with, same-sex marriage, the environment, all those things are still huge problems we've got to address. And we've got to split, depending on what happens in Georgia, the Senate is still going to be Republican. And so, by no means are the next 4 years Shangri-La, but
and the people that are upset, they're going to actively work to make it not, as they have said that was done to Trump, that they're going to actively work to not make it Shangri-La.
Sure.
Because, and that's always fun for me to watch, is the hard switches of, for 4 years I've been this way and I'm just going to completely revert. For the country is great, love America, it's amazing, and well, for the next 4 years it has to be terrible, it has to be horrible, you can't say anything good. And
what kind of longevity do you think that has? I don't know how we go back from here. So there was someone told me the concept of acceleration. I don't know if you're familiar with what I'm talking about, but if you can't fix something, speed up it breaking that you can get to something else.
Right. If the country's broken, just go ahead and break it now. Yeah.
Maybe we should,
I've heard people literally posit that as I've had, people that are ostensibly, fiscal conservatives, I'll be like, well, okay, you say you're a fiscal conservative about balanced budgets, then why are you not upset about, lowering tax income while spending more money, which is exactly what's happened in the last 4 years is we've taken in less into the coffers and we're spending more. It's more money in my pocket. It's all going to go to ruins anyway. I might as well just have more money in my pocket until then. And I'm like, it's literally that's what I'm going to die by 60, so I'm just going to eat all the cheeseburgers and drink all the beer until 59.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a very American way of thinking,
isn't it?
and it's concerning to me. I had this. I was watching a video. It was Noam Chomsky talking about. No, I was reading an article. Noam Chomsky talking about Trump, and not that I'm the first person to have this idea, but you know how sometimes there's a philosophy that's out there, but it only clicks into place for you later on.
Yeah.
And I was looking at the Republican Party and I was like, this is two parties melded together. You've got this 1% super wealthy, exclusive group, but they need to have a voting majority or close enough to a voting majority to make the laws. And so how do they do that? They hitch their ship to this racist, very antiquated way. And it's like, okay, if we'll let you we'll scratch that itch for you, but you've got to get us in office so that we can cut taxes and write laws. And, you
look out and go, who's a bunch of people stick to, abortion, war on Christmas people, Christian, like,
because where can we get a lot of people? And then you look at the people on Gandy Beach. Those are not the same people.
Yeah.
Those are very their interests are very different from each other.
Yep.
But somehow they're joined at the hip with this party.
Yeah, the people that they're funding this are the people that are actually flying over these states.
Right. It's crazy. Well, I really appreciate you coming in. I love your point of view online. I love kind of seeing what you've done. Running a business is interesting to me, and seeing how you kind of did it your own way is very appealing to me. And
thank you.
So in any event, and plus everybody that we know mutually just thinks the world of you. Mike Rideout, Mike Maida, Boomer Nichols, and so, in any event, thank you so much for coming by. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Wish you the best.
Cheers.